So hi, everybody. So I am Jeremy Pettus, and I'm joined by Stephen Ponder, and Nalani, and Aaron, and Schafer, and Eric is our TCOID guy. They're all coming on live here. So I'll have everybody introduce themselves in a second. Obviously, I've been around here at the TCOID office all day, but it's fun to kind of come on live and talk to everybody because most of what we've done have been pre-recorded. So it's just fun to kind of actually interact with you guys. But I really enjoyed typing in the Q&A and seeing the several thousand of people that joined today and saw all of our videos and lectures and things like that. Really appreciate the support, all the positive comments, because it really has been months of work to get all these lectures together, to get all these people from around the country to dedicate their time, to get Eric to help edit these songs and music videos and all that. So we really appreciate it. And again, we mentioned them in the beginning, but because this is a not-for-profit, we always do appreciate donations to kind of keep this going. Our goal is to get this back and to be in person, hopefully next calendar year, so we can enjoy this community together physically in person. But for the meantime, this is the best we can do, but thank God we have this because it's so nice to be able to interact with folks. So the way that this particular session is going to work is that it really is a live Q&A with people, providers, taking care of people with type 1 diabetes and or living with type 1 themselves. So we'll go around and have everybody introduce themselves, but please, in the Q&A thing at the bottom of Zoom, hopefully everybody's vaguely familiar with this thing called Zoom now. The chat section is for just comments, like whatever you want to chat with people. If you have questions for our panel, put that in the Q&A. And Schafer is going to be kind of looking through that and fielding us questions. And we'll get through as many questions as we can in the time we have and just have a conversation about whatever you guys want to talk about. So real quick, I'm Jeremy Pettus. I'm an endocrinologist here in University of California, San Diego. I work at taking control of your diabetes. I have type 1 myself since I was 15. And I will kick it. I'll go kind of clockwise for me, which would be Nalani. You would be next.
Hey everyone, I'm Nalani Hunsaker. I'm a physician assistant specializing in diabetes in the Inland Empire in California. I also have had type 1 diabetes for almost 23 years. Next week's my diabetes anniversary, but I'm really excited to be here. I actually decided I wanted to become a physician assistant at a TCOID conference, maybe almost 20 years ago now. I attended a conference in Oahu, and I saw a PA speak there who is also type 1, who was talking about insulin pumps, and he was just so cool and so kind. He kind of became my hero, and I immediately decided I wanted to be a PA. So I'm so stoked to be here. It's awesome what you guys do for people.
Thanks, Nalani. So I'll go to you, Aaron, next, and say hi. Give us your story.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. Hi, everybody. Aaron Neinstein. I'm an endocrinologist at University of California, San Francisco. I also run our digital health team at UCSF. I do not have type 1 diabetes, but have been an unofficial member of the community for over 20 years. I got into the diabetes field. I spent a summer in college with Dr. Fran Kaufman, who some of you may know has been in the diabetes field for a long, long time, and went to diabetes summer camp and decided then that I wanted to be part of the community. And so have been a member of the diabetes community ever since then in various forms. So thank you for welcoming me, and I'm happy to be here helping answer some questions today.
Yeah, and Aaron's so cool and so good at his job that I actually thought he had type 1 diabetes, which is probably the ultimate compliment you can give somebody. And we had to make an exception to allow him on this panel as an honorary type 1. So welcome aboard. And then below me, we have Stephen Ponder, who already gave a talk today on sugar surfing, changed his hat, threw on some sunglasses. So Stephen, give us a little story about yourself.
Yeah, Slash has entered the building. Thanks a lot, Jeremy. Yeah, my name is Steve Ponder. I'm a pediatric endocrinologist. I live in Central Texas, and I've lived with type 1 diabetes since March 1st, 1966, which is 56 years I've had this. I have my trusty Joslin medal here that I got a number of years ago, which about the only time I ever show it is for stuff like this. It just sits up there on the shelf. But I'm happy to be part of this. I really appreciate everyone here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, I don't have a jaws in the metal, but I have some bourbon up there. You know what? I didn't know we were doing this last year. This is from our rock video that we made last time. Like, put this on again. But we're doing Hawaii theme today, so I'm gonna stick with that. But Schafer, say hi, and maybe kick us off after you introduce yourself with our first question.
Right on. So I'm Schafer Boeder. I work with Jeremy at both UCSD and TCYD. I'm an endocrinologist here in San Diego. I do not have type 1 diabetes, and unlike Aaron, I don't even have an honorary degree in type 1 diabetes, but so I'm not formally part of the panel. I'm here to run support today, and I'm going to be sort of helping out with the Q&A by shunting the questions to the panel and to Jeremy to decide who can kind of help answer these. But we have such an awesome panel. I'm just excited to be here today and learn from all these great experts. So there's already a bunch of questions coming in. So let's just kind of get started, and I'll bring up some questions as they come in, and you guys can answer them. This first question, has to do. I think it's a good question. So people who, more and more, I think we're relying on technology, CGM, insulin pumps. Not everybody, of course. A lot of people are still using MDI, but for those people who are using more technology, things like pumps, there's always a risk that you have a pump failure or you're out of supplies or something like that. So the question specifically comes from Samantha, and it is, how do you recommend transitioning to pens or MDI if you have a PDM or pump failure, like in the middle of the night? But I think a broader sort of point is, if you're using these technologies and relying on them, what if something happens? Like, how do you be prepared for that?
Yeah, I think, I'll start real quick. So Steve and I actually did a lecture for this conference on traveling with type 1. And for me, that's when this comes up a lot. Something's going to go wrong. It's when you're traveling. When I've had to switch off a pump, or back and forth, it's been when I've, been on the road or flying or whatever. And it starts with being prepared and having, the right supplies. We also did talk a lot about how if you are in multiple daily injections, there's some better basal insulins now, Tresiba and Toujeo for type 1s. They have a lot of benefits. They're more consistent, less hypos, things like that. But when you're transitioning off a pump, they're not the best because they take a lot longer to kind of kick in and can take a couple days to get into steady state. So good old fashioned Lantus is probably the way to go. So it starts with having that, knowing kind of what your basal dose would be if you come off of a pump, so that, if your pump fails, you can inject your basal dose, and then, you start taking that daily. And those, first couple days while the basal insulin is kicking in can be a little bit of a nightmare. But I don't know. Anybody else have anything to add?
My take on that is I had a pump failure about 25 years ago, and I found that carrying super glue is a very good idea, because the tubing came out of the hard part, the lure lock, and I was in Jacksonville, Florida at the time, but I had super glue, and I was able to glue the thing in there because you could smell insulin, of course, right? And so I had no replacement. I was totally screwed up and didn't bring an extra set with me, and I had another day. But damn it, it worked. I put it on here, it stayed in there, and I flew home, and it was all good. Seriously, though, to Jeremy's point, having a long-acting insulin dose that's equivalent to your basal insulin on your pump, approximately. Sometimes you might take exactly the same amount. Some people might give you a fudge factor a little bit higher than that. But you got to remember that long-acting insulin takes a while to kick in. And if the pump is gone out and the site's lost, you're going to have that gap where you might get rather high. And so you may need to take a couple of extra little bridging doses, I call them, of your rapid-acting insulin by injection, just for a long enough period of time. It may be 2 or 3 shots, maybe over 3 or 4 hours before your long-acting kicks in.
I also think it's important to have your settings written down so you know what you're supposed to be doing, and then also talking to your endo team about, okay, what should I do to calculate my carb ratio? Because a lot of people depend so much on their technology that they don't even know how to calculate their insulin doses based on their carbs, because they're just so used to putting it in the pump. So I think having things written down and having a good plan is important. And I also tell my patients, if your pump is still working and for some reason there's another reason that you have to go on MDI, you can use your pump to calculate your injections for your food, and it will keep track of your active insulin time too. So I've had patients do that a lot too.
Schafer, you want to fire the next one at us? We'll give it to Aaron for sure.
Well, before, sort of just as a follow-up, before we kind of get to the next topic, there's a follow-up question that talks about, someone who watched your Traveling with Diabetes talk, and that there was a mention about diabetes supplies and medications that you can get without a prescription. So the question was, what are those things? And what can you get if you're out and about and you're in a strange city in an emergency situation?
Yeah, you can go into a pharmacy and get regular, and I think definitely regular you can get without a prescription. You're going to have to pay, out of pocket for it. It might be, pretty expensive. And I think maybe even in pH, but certainly regular, you can just, walk in and get. And that's something good to know. I've actually had to do that myself once also. Or super glue.
All right, so a little change in topic.
Do you want to make sure people know, do not try to inject the super glue.
Yeah.
Look what happened to me.
I was going to say, you beat me to it, Ponder.
All right. Can we talk a little bit about approaches to, so a couple of different questions from different people that sort of relate to more complex meals. How do we dose for, high carb meals, meals that have high amounts of fat? Jeremy, this makes me think of your and Steve's recent 3 donut video. How do we approach these sorts of complicated meals using either MDI or pumps? And then another question that was sort of similar is, how should we be thinking about calories? We talk about carbs all the time. What about calories and fat and all these other nutrients that we eat, and how do we account for those when we're bolusing?
Yeah, well, let's start with Aaron. And I think the preface to this, Aaron, is that all of us have different approaches to this. And, I think we're going to all have different takes, which is great. And the bottom line is there's more than one way to skin a cat. And as long as, people get kind of the results they're looking for, there's no real wrong way, but there's some tips that we can give people. So how would you handle that question?
I totally agree. I think it's very individualized to you as someone with type 1 as well, as to how you want to do it, because there are the more straightforward ways. So for example, if you have a pump that has an extended bolus feature, of course, using that is generally the easiest way. For people who are on multiple daily injections or who want to get a little bit more complex and start experimenting a little further, I think other options include splitting your bolus on your own. And so for particularly complex meals, you can start experimenting with taking some insulin early and some insulin later, and how you divide that up can be very individualized depending on the meal, and truly experimenting with that meal over and over again. So sometimes for particularly high fat meals, I'll have people take a little bit of insulin 30 minutes before the meal or 20 minutes before the meal, depending what type of rapid acting insulin you have. And then take an additional insulin injection 30 minutes or even an hour post-meal, so that you get sort of coverage over a much longer period of time. But it's definitely very individualized.
Yeah, I think, Stephen, will kind of end with you because you literally have written a book on this and more. But again, we all have different approaches. And I think, something I don't usually say, but it is definitely true, is I don't count carbs. I never have. And I think people can get kind of shocked and dismayed when I say that. And it's not because I'm being defiant. It's just that I never learned. When I was diagnosed in the 90s, that's not what we taught people. We did kind of exchange ratios and things like that. I do some form of carb counting in my head, but it's more kind of insulin to meals, insulin to experiences. I have, ratios for a sandwich or burrito or whatever. And I do my best, bolus before I eat, ideally pre-bolus. And then it's frequent kind of reassessment. And this is where Stephen, really talks about this, is looking at your CGM, responding to a trend you might have, bolusing a little bit later, doing these kind of frequent touches and interactions. And then the next time you come up against that meal again, you're probably going to be a little bit wiser. When you see that burrito again or that pizza again, you can kind of implement things that you might have done wrong the first time. But guess what? even after, teaching other people how to do this and eating pizza all the time, I still have highs, I still have lows. So it's about realizing it will require multiple glances at your CGM, multiple interactions with your diabetes. And if you get it wrong, that's okay. And you try your best to learn and just, fight the next fight. So it's complicated, but it can be done. And it's not about achieving perfection all the time. It's just trying to keep yourself in a safe range, eat the things you like to eat, donuts every once in a while in moderation, and you can, live a long, healthy life. So Nalani, do you have something to say about this? Because I think it is an important topic, because what we're really talking about is how you deal with the crap of diabetes, of dealing with, the fluctuations and the chaos.
I totally agree. I think that looking at patterns and paying attention is the best thing you can do for yourself with diabetes. I always tell patients, your CGM isn't for me. It's not for me to look at patterns. It's for you. So I want you to come in next time and tell me what the patterns are instead of the opposite. So I can't stress that enough. You pay attention to how the foods are impacting you, and then the next time you change it if it didn't work.
I want to say
that's the best you can do.
I want to say for the record, I haven't paid any of these people to talk about sugar sodium like what they're doing right now. This is they're saying this independently on their own. But to Jeremy's point and Nalani's, it's exactly, this is spot on. You have to play the situation, you have to watch it, you have to manage it in the moment. And by virtue of the question, you already have seen what happens when you just do it conventionally with a static approach. And so all the presenters have said exactly what dynamic management is all about. You have to keep your eye on your CGM, assuming that's what you're using, and look for these changes and decide whether or not they're significant, and whether or not they require your action or just continued observation. And it's not unlike driving a car, surfing, anything you do that requires you to keep your head in the game. That's spot on. All the three presenters are hitting the nail right on the head. Thank you.
All right, that Schafer, can you take us to the next topic?
Yeah, so the next question is something that I think we talk about a lot more on the type 2 diabetes side, and I kind of split my time between the two tracks here at TCOID, and it's weight loss. It's a question about how do we deal with weight loss and think about it in type 1 diabetes. It's something that I think a lot of providers don't really even talk about as much, and there's this idea that everyone with type 1 diabetes is skinny and doesn't have problems with being overweight and obese, and that's not the case at all. And so how do we how should we sort of frame weight loss in type 1 diabetes, and then are there any approaches to actually help with that? Again, on type 2 diabetes, there's these great new medications that are approved that to use in diabetes that actually help with weight loss, and unfortunately these are not approved in type 1. So how do we think about these?
Well, I want to hear what other people say, because I need some help myself. So Aaron, you want to kick us off this time?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think what you said, Schafer, is really important, which is just because you have type 1 diabetes doesn't mean that you aren't a person who has weight questions and preferences like anybody else. And so I think making sure you have an endocrinologist who has that sensitivity and openness to have the conversation with you is really important to make sure that you can even start to have that dialogue. And of course, insulin is an anabolic hormone. So insulin, by its nature, does help you store energy, and that can mean weight gain if you're using insulin in a way that you're on sometimes too much basal insulin, which can trigger weight gain. And so I think one of the things I like to do is just have the conversation about what people's weight preferences are, what they're looking to do. Take a look at their same thing as we would do if you didn't have diabetes. Take a look at your lifestyle. Are you exercising? How is your nutrition, and what types of foods are you eating? And then take a look at your insulin regimen and see if somewhere along the way you've ended up on an insulin regimen that is contributing to weight gain. Because I think one of the things I feel like it's my job to do as an endocrinologist is make sure that your medication regimen isn't making things worse. And so that's where I think we can help a lot.
To that point, I will add that the one single thing you can do is exactly what Aaron said, which is to get your basal insulin down to what I call basal neutrality. The job description of a basal rate is just to keep you steady. You shouldn't be feeding it all the time. And I've heard Jeremy and Steve talk many a time about how common they see people that have heavy basal rates, especially overnight, and they fear low blood sugar at night, and they have to feed that insulin monster before they go to bed to make it happy. And simply sometimes reducing the basal insulin and not just eating because you're being told to eat, but because you want to eat, can help you in that regard in terms of weight control.
Yeah, I think for me, again, there's reasons why type 1s have issues with weight. First of all, everybody can gain weight. Second of all, for us, it makes exercise more difficult. You can go low and, have to eat when you don't want to eat. There's reasons for it. It doesn't mean you just have like a pity party. We have to kind of fight back. And, there's no magic bullet. There's no specific drug for type 1 diabetes. There's no specific thing I can tell people. But I can say that these dietary approaches that other people take are available to type 1s, meaning, when I really do want to try to shed a few pounds, the first thing I do is go really low carb. And that affects my blood sugars and it helps me use less insulin and maybe lose a few pounds. You also can do intermittent fasting. This is another kind of fad diet. But if your basal insulin is dialed in, there's no reason why you can't, fast from 8 p.m. to noon. So that's something else that's available to people. Thinking about times of day that you exercise is also something else. You're more insulin resistant in the morning. So it's a little bit harder to go low in the morning. So telling, I've noticed when I Peloton or exercise in the morning, I don't go low as much as if I run or something in the evening. So some of those little things can help. But the bottom line, it's going to be work. It's about, burning more energy than you consume, which is kind of the same for everybody else. It just happens to be, it requires a little bit more thought for us with type 1.
I also want to add, just kind of from a mental health aspect of it, that a lot of times people with type 1 diabetes, at least from my experience, have kind of an interesting relationship with food. And I think that stems from when we were all diagnosed, when we were kids, essentially, and told we have to pay so much attention to what we're eating. And in a way that can sometimes develop an unhealthy relationship with food. And so looking at internally at that, and maybe working with your endo or a therapist or something to figure out how is your mental health impacting your ability to lose weight, and then kind of moving forward from there.
All right, Schafer, you want to take us to the next thing?
Yeah, sort of a follow on, but a few questions specifically related to basal insulins while we're sort of talking about that topic. And so one of the questions is, for people who are using more like MDI insulin, using insulin injections. One question was, okay, Detamir, we oftentimes use twice a day. Is there a benefit to splitting your, for example, Lantus or other basal insulins to more than one injection a day? And is there any reason to consider that? And then the second question, I think, goes right along with what we're talking about in terms of finding that right basal dose, that correct basal dose for your own body. If you're using a basal insulin injection, how do you deal with dawn phenomenon? And when you see your blood sugars in the morning sort of ramping up, and depending on what time you check your fasting blood sugar, you can have very different answers if you have that dawn phenomenon, which, as we know, is not always a sort of a consistent daily change. How do we deal with those types of issues?
I'll take the first part real quick and then get the second part, dawn phenomenon, to you guys. So, splitting basal insulin is definitely an option. As I mentioned earlier, I really try to get all my type 1s on MDI, on Tresiba or Toujeo, which are these new basal insulin that you don't have to split. One, single dose is very consistent, and like I said, has less hypos. And I feel comfortable saying that because these have been around for years now and are generally well covered for insurance. So it's not like I'm saying you have to get some new super, cool Lamborghini that you can't afford. These are pretty much accessible to almost everybody with type 1. And I think if you are on MDI, you should definitely go that route. The dawn phenomenon becomes a little bit trickier. And I don't know, anybody want to kind of pick up there with how you would approach that in any situation, pumps or shots or whatever?
Aaron, why don't you take that one?
So actually, I was going to hit one other part first, which is one reason for splitting basal insulin is if you're an active person. I might, and you don't want to be on a pump, I might sometimes have people take different doses in the morning and evening of basal insulin if they want to be particularly active on a day. That would be the only situation where I wouldn't agree with going on to Tresiba or Toujeo. In terms of dawn phenomenon, otherwise, I totally agree, Jeremy. Tresiba and Toujeo for almost everybody on MDI. For dawn phenomenon, I think look at the timing of when you're taking your basal insulin. If you're not on Tresiba or Toujeo, if you're on Glargine or Detamir, make sure that it's not just the insulin wearing off, that if you've taken, if you're taking it at 10 a.m. every morning or 9 a.m. every morning as your time, then maybe it's not actually dawn phenomenon, and maybe it's just your insulin starting to wear off. If it is truly dawn phenomenon, I don't. This is one of the limitations, in my opinion, of where using traditional basal insulin kind of runs out of options. I don't know if others have tricks.
In my experience, I work with kids, and they don't always have the luxury of being able to switch to Toujeo or Tresiba, and we're using Basaglar or some form of Glargine, and so we do like Aaron said before. We experiment a little bit. We'll move the time these doses are taken, and or split or asymmetrically split. And I think everybody that's seen the action curves of these basal insulins, they're not perfectly flat. They actually have a little mound of a quote unquote peak somewhere. And so we try to situate that to where it peaks quote unquote around early morning time. And that's what we do with MDI. Obviously the pump patients, we can pre-program changes for them. And we haven't addressed that, but I think that's what the standard answer is to at least a couple of hours before you anticipate that rise, you try to head it off with either a stair-step increase in basal, or of course, if you have a hybrid closed-loop pump, it'll pick it up and start making those changes for you automatically.
Yeah, that was the last thing I was going to say. When I had patients come see me 3 years ago, shots, pumps, whatever you want to do. But it really has recently, in just the last year or two, especially with Control IQ and looping, that these systems are now doing things you simply cannot do with MDI. And it's funny that personally, I have not even thought about dawn phenomenon in years since I went on one of these systems, because just like Dr. Ponder just said, they can automatically start adjusting. And the problem with the dawn phenomenon is it's there one day, it's not the next. It's hard to make set changes for something that is so variable. And that's where these systems are really beautiful, that when the dawn phenomenon is there, it can increase the insulin. When it's not, it doesn't have to. And I wake up every day with a good blood sugar because these systems are really helping me overnight. So I am not pushing pumps on people more, but I'm definitely urging people to go on pumps more than I ever had because of these additional benefits that are fairly new.
Let me give you one more. I'll give you a Daniel Boone answer too, which is the wilderness answer, Rambo answer. I still use MDI. I was on a pump for 35 years, got off a while back once I did the sugar surfing. But the Rambo answer is you set your alarms and you wake up and you microbolus. And I know that's not popular, and there are probably a lot of people that say, screw that, I'm not going to do it. But that's how I do mine. I'm a light sleeper. I'm on call like a lot of the other doctors are. So I wake up to the slightest noise. And so if I hear my sensor going off and it's over 140, I'll do a mini bolus or micro bolus, and I'll pivot it back around. That's what I do. And that doesn't bother me, but that's my choice. And so, but I endorse what the other speakers have said in terms of the other options, which are a little bit more palatable perhaps than the Rambo answer I just gave you.
Steve, that's great, because there's a handful of questions actually that sort of fall into this concept of, okay, I'm using MDI insulin and I've never used a pump. Is now a good time to think about that? Or I'm using even finger sticks, and what are the benefits of CGM? So there's a lot of questions wrapped in there, but in general, when Jeremy sort of just gave us his take that that makes sense to me, that this technology has improved a lot in recent years to the point where for some people it really makes sense to try it now if you haven't tried it before. But what are your guys' conversations? Nalani, if you have a patient who's on MDI, like how do you decide if they're the right person to move to a pump or to adopt a new technology, and how do you approach that? Because I think a lot of people who are still using MDI may be wondering, we talk all about CGM and pumps and stuff all the time at TCOID, but how do you cancel that as someone who really has a finger on it?
I basically tell them how it impacted my life and how it's changed my life. I mean, I have always been, a very type A diabetic person. I'm always paying really close attention to my finger sticks and my CGM. Like before I was on CGM, I think I would test my blood sugar about 20 times a day. I'm not even exaggerating. I was so obsessed with it. And I always had really good control because of it, but I didn't realize how much weight it was having on my shoulders until I switched to hybrid closed loop therapy. And I all of a sudden could think about other things, or essentially not think about my diabetes every 15 minutes like I was doing previously. And so I sort of just kind of tell them how it's impacted my lifestyle and how I just feel a little bit more free and more, I guess, normal, just like a regular non-diabetic person. And typically people want to try it. I mean, if I tell them what it can do, they'll want to try it. And whether they stick with it or not is of course up to them. It's all up to them. We can just make suggestions. But a lot of times when people go on it, they don't want to go back, is what I've noticed.
Yeah, I would say, Aaron, do you want to comment and then I'll add my 2 cents?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I just think, pumps and CGMs have now both been around for decades. And I think one thing that's really important that I try to do with people is revisit, because there may be many of you out there who have tried them in the past and felt like they sort of overpromised and underdelivered. And I think in 2021, these technologies are in a very different place than they were certainly in 2005 and 2010 and even 2015. Things have changed quite dramatically, both in terms of the accuracy and ease of use of continuous glucose monitors, and then having hybrid closed loop. So I think one of the most important things is just to have the conversation regularly and revisit it, because where you are in your life may have changed. The technology options change all the time. And so I just make sure that we revisit the conversation regularly.
Yeah, I think, I'll say real quick is that my hierarchy is CGM number 1, 2, and 3. And, we all might talk about different ways, MDI, pumps, like whatever. But to me, you have to have a CGM. And that might sound hard-lined, but that's just the way I feel about it. And just to Aaron's point, I see a lot of patients that 5-10 years ago where they tried an old Medtronic sensor and it hurt, it was painful, and they've never come back to it. These things are accurate, they're, provide safety and so much information you can't get with finger sticks. And then if you want to go onto a pump or not, that's a little bit of a different conversation. The patient that always jumps out to me for these hybrid closed loop systems are the patients that are having particularly problems overnight, because that's where these systems to me have the most benefit. And it breaks my heart when I see patients on MDI or pumps or whatever, that during the day, they're doing a really good job and you're meticulously managing things, and then things go kind of haywire at night. And that's where these systems can really help, that when you're sleeping, it can kind of adjust and bring you, into range. And I sleep better as a result. I don't get low at night. I have less alarms. I wake up with a good number. All those things are the benefits to me of these systems. And yes, it's training and it's another thing, on your body, whatever. But when I talk to patients, usually there's like a month period that you can try these things kind of risk-free. And I'll just tell them, like, make sure you're very aware of that and don't turn it in 32 days later, turn it in 29 days later to make sure that you try it. And then you make an assessment and then decide. So Stephen.
I'm going to step in as the old man now, 56 years of diabetes. And I'll tell you, I've gone through several paradigm shifts, and what you're referring to is what I've seen happen. How many years into self-blood glucose monitoring were we saying, oh, just keep doing urine testing, for a while? At some point that quickly replaced that. Of course, it was cumbersome. It's a pain. It took water and you had to be in your sink. And then over the next 10, 15 years, we got to where we are now. I'm seeing the same thing happen all over again, moving from SMBG into sensing. And it's going to be how we all do it eventually. We'll be talking about how novel it was to actually poke your finger and draw blood, just like it was to go pee on a strip, and how that's become ancient history. So we're just living through a paradigm shift that I've lived through several of them over the last 56 years of being a person with diabetes. And I'm just seeing another one happen right now. And there'll be more that'll happen as we move forward in time.
Cool. That was a good one to spend some time on. So thanks for setting that up, Schafer. So what's next?
So this one is a little hard to put in question form, but there are several sort of comments and questions that relate to mental health and diabetes. And sort of, we talk about, the effect of mental health on diabetes and also the effect of diabetes on mental health. Sometimes it's tough to separate those two. Obviously, I think, that this whole conference is TCOID's attempt at one approach to sort of dealing with the burden of diabetes. This is an omnipresent sort of disease that's always with people with diabetes all the time. But what advice do you guys have from your personal experience or with your experience with patients in just dealing with the burden that is diabetes and its effect on diabetes stress and burnout and other mental health issues?
I'd love to jump in on this one. This is something though I don't have type 1, I feel very passionately about this. So I recommend if you're on this call, go to diabetesdistress.org and take the diabetes distress survey. It takes about 5 or 10 minutes and helps you become a little bit more self-aware about where you fall with respect to diabetes distress. I think in particular, because A1C is a simple, easy number for everybody, it has become a measuring stick for diabetes over the course of the last several decades. And it is not the only measuring stick. And in particular, as hybrid closed loop systems allow you to achieve tighter control with less effort, the conversation I'm having now very frequently with people is, if your level of distress over your diabetes could be at a 1 out of 10 and you could have a 75% time in range, do you really want to take yourself from a 1 to a 7 on the distress scale to get to 80% time in range or to get your A1C down 0.2 or 0.3%? So I think it's really important that we start using people's mental health and sense of burnout and distress around diabetes as an equivalent metric to A1C. I think it is just as important.
I'll say something too, another 56-year thing. My first 15 years, I was on 1 injection a day. My first A1C was about 10.8 after 15 years of diabetes. And I'm here 56 years later. I have evolved an attitude, and I share this with my patients all the time, that, and I've traveled enough, just like everybody in this panel has traveled. I know that there are places in this world where type 1 diabetes is a death sentence, still, as of 2021. And so I hold this idea, and it may be a minority view, that every day is a gift, and that 56 years ago, I should have died. I'm living a second life right now. It's hard to be ingrateful when I think of things that way. It's allowed me to have a granddaughter. It's allowed me to have a family, a job, and I appreciate all of that. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. And it makes all this stuff pale in comparison that we have to do every day for the benefits like that. It has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with what my A1C is, what my time in range is. It's the ability to have a life which I thought was going to be denied me when I was diagnosed. I was told nothing but doom and gloom, like many people here, that I'm going to be dead before 40. And when I hit 40, I have to tell you, I had a party. I made it to 40 and I'm still alive. And I still have all my digits and my kidneys are working and all that stuff, right? So I look at it maybe differently than other people do. It's about choices. I don't judge myself. As I said before, there's no good or bad. And I'm here to live whatever life that I'm meant to live. And I've been blessed to have 56 years of it since the day I should have died. That's how I look at it.
Well said, Dr. Ponder. I have 2 things that really helped me. And one of them I didn't learn until I was in college. And that's that it's okay to ask for help and tell people that you're not okay and that you need somebody to help you with your diabetes or help relieve some of the burden of the diabetes. That is so okay to say. And I don't know that that's said enough, because diabetes is an invisible illness. Nobody can tell that you're sick unless you say something. So you really have to speak up and advocate for yourself. And then the second thing is that the best thing you can do for yourself is build yourself a team, whether that's your clinical person, your endo, your family, your friends, another type 1 or type 2. I think having teammates is so essential to being mentally healthy with diabetes.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add, because I think this, again, it's a really important topic, is how important it is to kind of reward yourself or celebrate the victories. And this is something that I kind of mentioned in my diabetes as a breeze talk, that what is our goal living with type 1 diabetes? Our goal is that nothing happens. We just want to get through a day of not being high, not being low. We want to get through our lives without having problems with kidneys, feet, like whatever. And how can you live your life trying to achieve nothing? It's impossible. And I think this really struck me when I was actually at a TCOID conference, and we had these eye screenings in the health fair, and I had some time to kill. So I got my eyes, quickly screened. And the guy said, well, how long have you had diabetes? And I think it was 20 years at that time. And he's like, well, your eyes look good. Like, you've done a good job. And it made me like very emotional. And I had to think, why did that make me emotional? It was because we don't get told that you've done a good job or whatever. So celebrating those things is so important. Stephen, I know you have your hand up. Were you?
No, I was going to say, it's interesting. I have a similar story. I had some background retinopathy in 1981, of course, 15 years of one injection. And then when I go see my retinal guy now, he remarks all the time, I can't tell you have diabetes, which, at the time I thought a lot of this stuff was irreversible, So all those myths that were shoved into my head back in the 60s and 70s were just that, they were myths. And we have proven that we can reverse certain things. I can't say everything's reversed, but my microalbuminuria, the last time I checked it, was 27 as opposed to 25. And you all know what that means. That's relatively low. And that's been 40 years since I was diagnosed with microalbuminuria. I thought that was my ticket to renal failure at the time too, when I had the eyes. And now they can't find all they see are the laser burns over there from some preventative therapy, but my vision's fine. It's a payoff. Like I said, the payoffs are physical and they are emotional to put the work in.
Yeah, and I think, I was going to say too that these celebratory moments don't have to be like yearly eye exams or whatever. It can be, like I was saying before, like you did a good job with your bolus or whatever. You have a friend with type 1 diabetes, so there's some positive that comes out of it, rather than, gosh, this disease sucks and blah blah blah. There can be some joy, and it's okay to be happy with diabetes. That celebrate you're doing well, that you have friends, a community. That you really have to draw on some concrete positives at times to help you keep going. So anyways, that's a long topic because it goes hand in hand with, I want to control my diabetes and live a long and healthy life, but I also don't want to lose my freaking mind. And I always say that the goal with any diabetes therapy is better control and less work. I mean, that's the goal of everything that we're trying to do, is stay healthy and not have to freaking think about it. So anyways, Schafer, you're up.
All right, I think we're getting short on time. I almost want to end on that note because it's a good note to go out on. There is one comment I just wanted to one question actually that I wanted to bring up, and I think we don't have to spend a lot of time on it. And today's been nice. It's been kind of a vacation also from the other elephant in the room, which is COVID, which is why we're still doing these virtual. We haven't talked about COVID that much. We've kind of been talking about COVID over the last year. Thank you, Dr. Ponder, and how it relates to diabetes. But now we're in a new phase of COVID and this pandemic, where a lot of people are vaccinated. Certainly vaccines are more widely available. Things are opening up. People are being a little less careful. People are going back to work. People are going back to restaurants. And I think maybe it's just a good time to take one last sort of think about, as people living with diabetes, how should we be thinking about going back out into the world, going back to work, getting vaccinated, and keeping ourselves safe in this moment.
I'll open up to anybody else who wants to take that one for the.
I guess I should say, because I have diabetes and I've COVID and all that. We got vaccinated here in my institution back in December, We got the Pfizer vaccine, and we've had strict protocols where I work, very strict. And last year we went to virtual telehealth visits for about a month. But slowly but surely, everything came back online, and so now we just have telehealth visits periodically. I made a case for this at the Texas Diabetes Council. That they'd not included type 1 and for this, and I sit on the council, and as opposed to type 2. And of course, we all know that type 1 technically puts you at higher risk for poor outcomes if you get COVID than even type 2. I think they should both be equivalent. And finally, of course, they have become that way. So a lot of my patients are very concerned about that. A lot of my teenagers have been able to get their vaccines here. I've had very little vaccine hesitancy with my population here, at least the 16 and older crowd. Some of the families here in Central Texas, we do have a little bit of vaccine hesitancy, I wouldn't lie, but for the diabetes population, there seems to be very little of that.
Yeah, I think my main advice would be if there's anyone on this call who has not gotten a COVID vaccine, please go get it. The vaccine is safe, it's effective, and in particular for people with diabetes are at risk, as Dr. Ponder was saying, and please go get your vaccine.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing maybe to end on, Schafer, is that was the other part of this conference is like, yeah, we want a vacation from our diabetes, but it's also because the world's coming back, people are thinking about actually taking actual vacations and having things that, they're looking forward to again. And yes, absolutely get, vaccinated. And I've always said from the beginning that people with diabetes need to be the poster children for how to behave in this pandemic in terms of protecting themselves and their family and things like that. So now that, everyone on this call is vaccinated, everything's starting to improve. Our work situation, just being here at the TCOID office with other people, thinking about doing in-person conferences again, thinking about, I'm sure that all of us now probably have something on the books in terms of a mini vacation or getaway that we can't wait to do. And that's all thanks to, in part the vaccine and taking care of ourselves. So I'm glad to see people taking this seriously, getting vaccinated, and again, having the diabetes voice of, listen, like, we are at risk and we're getting vaccinated, and we, really support this effort, I think is important. And I can't wait to go to Hawaii. And, and I think that'll be my final step, or one of the final steps to life is back to quote unquote normal. We'll be going on a trip with the family. So I can't wait. So is that it for us, Schafer?
I think that's about it. I think we are out of time.
Yeah, so I'll just say we're going to conclude the end of the whole conference here with a encore performance, as we call it, of Eric and my song. So you can stay tuned for that. But then all of these videos will be up online on this VFairs platform for another 30 days. So people can come back here at their leisure and log on and watch everything. And then after that, it'll all get moved over to our website. And again, tcoid.org, we have a thing called the Video Vault, which literally has thousands of hours now of free content that you can search for whatever you want, Freza, exercise, whatever. And videos will come up that you guys can watch for free, share with people, all that kind of stuff. So I just want to wrap it up by saying a sincere thank you, by the way, that everybody is doing this, kind of out of the goodness of their heart, taking time on Saturday to be here to provide this education. So thanks to Aaron, Nalani, Steve, and Schafer, Eric, who is just a TCOID symbol for me, for doing this. And we really, really appreciate it. And I'm speaking for the participants in the diabetes community, to all of you, a sincere thank you for giving up your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
All right. Bye, guys. Thanks again. We'll talk soon.
Ciao. Bye-bye.